Welcome, Be Health Empowered family. Thank you so much for joining tonight. I am so happy that you're here in this safe space where we can get our questions answered and have a great dialogue. This is Dr. Melissa Clarke, and we have changed the name of the show from Real Talk to Excuse Me, Doctor, because the whole idea about this time is for us to be empowered to ask questions and empowered with information to make the right decisions and the wise decisions for us, our family, and our community. So we're now Excuse Me, Doctor, the show with Dr. Melissa Clarke. And I'm so happy again that you can join. We're on two platforms, Facebook Live as well as YouTube. And I am just happy that everyone is able to come on in and join the discussion tonight. As usual, we will be talking about the weekly recap, the debunk, and we have two incredible guests that are waiting in the wings to join the conversation. So I'm just going to wait before I officially start. I see people coming gradually into the room. Wonderful. Okay. Great. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started with Excuse Me, Doctor, with Dr. Melissa Clarke. And again, so glad that you all could join us this week. And this week has really been an emotional roller coaster, really on several fronts, a really horrific week in terms of the protests that have been happening. I'm going to talk about COVID-19 and the pandemic, but it also has to be within the context of acknowledging the trauma that we're all as a nation going through right now, given the blatant aggression towards Christian Cooper in Central Park, and given the senseless deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. I'm praying for all of their families, and I'm also praying for the safety and well-being of the protesters who've taken to the streets demanding justice in these cases. We're dedicating the show tonight to talking about the Black family and staying well as we confront racism and the pandemic together, because the Black family is the unit of resilience. We have an incredible couple of guests tonight who are going to walk with us on this journey as we navigate this topic. There are a couple of guests, but they're also a power couple. They are married and they bring some wonderful experience and expertise to the conversation. And I can't wait for you all to meet them later on in the show. And so before we get to them and before we get to that topic, we're going to do our weekly recap and our weekly health update. So where are we this week? Well, the numbers. Over 1.82 million cases in the United States. And as staggering as that number sounds, it's actually, grossly underrepresented. I say that every week because it's really probably 5 times that, given the number of people who don't have symptoms from the virus, haven't been tested, can't get tested if they want to get tested, because testing isn't as widespread as it's supposed to be. That plan that the president was supposed to roll out with having retailers have spaces all around the country for testing hasn't panned out. CVS has really been the leader with about 10% of their locations having it, but all the other ones like Walmart and Kroger and Target are all less than 5% and haven't reached the mark in terms of where they said they would be in terms of testing. So your best bet still for testing is to contact your local health department and find out what places that your local health department might have around the city for testing. We do know, unfortunately, there have been 106,000 deaths, but thankfully, there have been almost 400,000 people who've recovered from the coronavirus. So we also want to keep that figure in mind because it's important to also balance the bad news with the positive news. The next thing I wanted to talk about was antibody treatment. Again, balancing the bad with the positive news. So Eli Lilly, a large company, as well as their partners, have come up with a treatment that uses antibodies. Now, what are antibodies? When you have an infection from any kind of agent in your body actually forms proteins that are specific to that agent, whether it's a virus, whether it's a bacteria, whether it's a fungus, whether it's yeast, whatever it is, your body forms these proteins called antibodies that are specific to that particular agent. And in the case of COVID-19, there are antibodies that your body forms to fight off the virus. Well, these companies have harvested those antibodies from people who've recovered, and they've mass produced them and now are ready to start a clinical trial to try to figure out how many different kinds of antibodies are needed, what dose is needed, are they safe, are they effective in a wide variety of populations. And they claim that they're going to have results as early as the fall. So we have to keep our eyes on that as a possible treatment. It's better as a treatment the earlier you get it, because there are two phases to COVID-19. There's the initial infection, and then there's your body overreacting, which causes a lot of the damage to organs, especially to the lung and kidneys and heart. So it's important to get it early before you have that second over-inflammation reaction to the virus. Now, ever since Memorial Day, we've had spikes in numbers, spikes in states such as Alabama and Mississippi. And we also all saw that party, the pictures of the party at Lake of the Ozarks with all those people. Well, of course, they now have positive cases from that party and are tracking down the contacts of the individual who has tested positive, who they think was probably positive when they went to the party. So for that reason, I say that it's important as we see these protests this week with everybody taking public transportation to get there and interacting in the crowds and getting arrested and being put in the same room in the police precinct with no hand sanitizer. Some people don't have masks. Sometimes the police themselves don't have masks. As we see that situation unfolding, I say it's really important, if you're going to protest, to have a protest plan and to have a post-protest plan. So what do I mean? So with a protest plan, it's important to make sure that you take your own mask, that you take your own hand sanitizer and wipes, and if possible, stay 6 feet physically distant from the other protesters. At least move frequently through the crowd and don't get stuck at one spot around the same group of people. And then your post-protest plan. So I'm especially concerned for the protesters, of course. I'm also concerned for the individuals back home, those people who might have protested in Selma, Alabama, those people who might have protested when ML King was shot, Dr. King, those people who might have protested at Rodney King, those individuals with underlying conditions or those who are 65 or above who are back at home. And when the protester who lives with them walks back through the door, they're overjoyed to see them because they've come back home safely, and they give them a huge hug. And unbeknownst to both of them, they may be carrying the coronavirus with them. Again, the Trojan horse who comes in and brings the virus back home where it should be safe, where your loved one who's vulnerable has been waiting. So you have to have a post-protest plan to protect your loved ones. I say stay isolated from them for at least 14 days. And you want to make sure that you wear your mask around them, stay physically distant 6 feet within the house if possible. Wipe down all shared areas like countertops, light switches, sinks and faucets. to make sure that you're minimizing the spread of the virus in the household. And if you can, what's really important, around day 4 or 5, go get COVID tested. So make your appointment today for 4 to 5 days from now, to get that COVID test, to at least have some reassurance that you might not be carrying it. And if you are positive, then you have to continue to stay isolated for another at least 10 days from day 4 when you got the test, right? So while you're self-quarantining, make sure you watch for these symptoms: fever, cough, shortness of breath, body aches, headache, nausea or vomiting, diarrhea, or loss of taste or smell. Those are all symptoms that could mean that you are coming down with COVID-19. And you should also know when it's important to seek medical attention. That would be when you are having shortness of breath, for sure, chest pain or stomach pain that won't go away, and vomiting that won't go away, or high fevers that persist and won't go away with Tylenol. And then to treat yourself, we've talked about supplements in other episodes, specifically episode 2, where we talked about self-care. You want to consider high-dose vitamin C. You also want to consider zinc. If you don't have immune system problems already, like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, you might want to consider elderberry and echinacea and turmeric. And you also want to make sure that your vitamin D level is correct. You don't want to overdose on it. It's ideal to know where you're starting off with. And I understand that many of us can't see doctors and get blood tests right now for vitamin D. So start off with a low dose, about 500 milligrams, so that you're not, international units, so that you're not overdosing on vitamin D. But vitamin D is also very important as well. So that's your protest plan and your post-protest plan, making sure you practice the behaviors at home, know what the symptoms of COVID-19 are, know how to protect your loved ones at home after you come back from the protests. Now, we are going to move on to our weekly debunk, and that is contact tracing. I have seen on social media, I've talked to people who say, well, contact tracing is just the government trying to get into my business. Well, that's not the case. Contact tracing is merely tracking down people who might have been exposed to the virus to ensure that they don't pass it to others. It's a way of tracing the routes that the virus has taken and cutting them off to make sure that the virus doesn't reach and spread to more people. Tracers are often the ones who tell people that they are positive for coronavirus, and they provide information about how to stay safe from spreading it to others in your family. They also ask about where you've been, if you've tested positive, where you've been in recent days, to try to figure out where you might have gotten it, and also who you have interacted with since then, to try to warn them that they too may be contacts who will need to self-isolate. A contact is defined by the CDC as somebody who has been at least 15 minutes within 6 feet of somebody who tests positive for the virus. And that contact has to be within 2 days of the person feeling sick, because that's the time when the virus would be most contagious. Now, a lot of people don't understand that they might be asked to quarantine for up to 2 weeks if they've been exposed. And that, of course, introduces a lot of questions about, well, how am I going to do that safely at home if I live in a small space with a lot of people? And it also might be there might be concern about losing jobs because of that. Tracers keep in touch with both the cases and the contacts. They help you monitor your health. They make sure you have a way to get food, and in some cases, find a place for you to stay away from your family, and may also even, write letters to explain to your job what's going on with you. They have to work quickly, so it's important to be responsive to them because people become infectious in just a few days after contracting the virus. And, some people might want to resist cooperating with contact tracers, but remember, it is for the good of you, your family, and the community. Contact tracing is not new. They did not invent it for this pandemic. It's been around for a very long time. It has been helpful in tracing contacts having to do with tuberculosis and HIV and many other infectious diseases, including stopping the spread of the Ebola virus. So, it's important to remember that contact tracing is really one of the best tools that we have at this point in time to help contain the spread of COVID-19. So that's our weekly debunk. And now I want to move on to why we're all here today, which is to really talk about what's been going on in this parallel crisis that we have right now with racism and the response to it, as well as fighting the pandemic. As I mentioned before, the Black family is the unit of resilience. And I want to introduce our next two guests, who are a couple who have a wonderful family and have really skill sets that are so pertinent to this discussion right now. So the first person I want to introduce is Etan Thomas. He's a Renaissance man, an activist athlete who's had an 11-year career in the NBA, and he's now a radio show host, mentor, columnist, MSNBC and CNN contributor, and he's authored several books on everything from activism to fatherhood. He's been honored by the NBA Players Association as well as the Dr. ML King Foundation for his social justice advocacy. So welcome, Etan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And then next to him, all those accomplishments pale in comparison to the fact that he married our next guest, his wonderful wife, Nichole Thomas. She's a former basketball star herself. She's an entrepreneur who founded the company Virtuous Living, which is a lifestyle brand. And she's also authored a book, Living Virtuously. She's a leading expert in the world of nutritional health and wellness and uses her numerous certifications as well as a solid spiritual foundation, which I have witnessed myself, to support people in healing their lives. So thank you both for joining us. I'm really happy you're here.
We're happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So this has been just a tumultuous week. I mean, we've seen people take to the streets in anger and frustration. We've probably had those same emotions ourselves. And, right before we came on this evening, things were further fueled by statements from the White House that are threatening people instead of trying to address the divide constructively. Mm-hmm. It's no wonder that people are protesting. So my first question is for Etan. As an activist who confronts racism, is there such a thing as responsible activism in the middle of a pandemic?
That's a good question, because as I'm looking at everything, the first thing I was thinking about, and actually my daughter, baby Sierra, pointed out as she was looking at the different protests and stuff, she was like, they're not social distancing. And she said, they don't have masks on. This is not going to be good. We haven't left our house. We've been really quarantined to the point where, we're not worried about what the governor says and what, everything happens. We're going to be quarantined even past when they open up. And, I think it's tough because with everything going on, COVID-19 kind of got pushed to the side as the priority. And it's hard. I mean, I've never really seen a social distancing protest. I've been to many protests. And that's really not the thought while you're there. So that's, it's a scary situation because we're looking at, it's not the priority, but the coronavirus is still out there. I mean, so we're almost like expecting a second wave coming in a little while. And that's not a good thing at all.
Not at all. But I know that people are compelled to go out into the streets
Mm-hmm.
because of the emotions that are going on with this. And that's why, in my opening, I was saying we need to have a protest plan and a post-protest plan, right? To keep ourselves and our loved ones safe, because we still, as African Americans, are the number one people who are contracting COVID-19 and dying from COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
So with these sort of twin major stressors, and I guess this question is probably for Nichole. How are with your wellness certifications and all that you know about health and well-being, how are you helping to keep your family's immune system up and prepared and ready to go?
It's a difficult task. I mean, emotions are real, and they're real things, and they impact your body in significant ways. And I mean, we were just having a conversation with our kids this weekend about how just the quarantine itself is impacting their mental health. Sure. And how they're managing it, how they're navigating it. And then you add to it the situation with George Floyd, and you add to it the protests, and you add to it the extra stressors that come day by day. Every day we wake up, we see something new. So it's difficult. But I mean, the one thing that I know to be true is food heals. And if you do it right, if you use the right ingredients, we had, certain dinners, we had certain meals today that were super high in antioxidants, just to kind of heal for oxidative stress. And we had things like turmeric and onions and garlic and those flavonoids and brightly colored fruits and vegetables, just to kind of help to support the immune system. Every day we're taking probiotics, so we're taking vitamin C, we're taking zinc, we're taking elderberry. The kids kind of have a routine with what they take on a daily basis, just because I'm their mom, I guess. But they know that if they wake up in the morning and they come downstairs, they think, okay, well, my throat feels weird, mommy, I'm kind of itchy. Maybe it's allergies. Their first inclination isn't to reach for medication, it's to reach for food. And so, we try to help them to learn. Even, Etan and I were talking the other day about how we can boost our immune systems even more.
Right.
And we're pretty much doing all the things that we should do. Really, the two things that I would, add are something that I do today that I hadn't done in a very long time: getting outside in the grass barefoot and just grounding myself, because I felt emotionally just like, I mean, it's hard not to. With what's going on right now, it's awful. And your heart breaks, and you see people struggling. You see people that are suffering with the virus, suffering heartbreak on top of it because of what's going on in our country. It's awful. So, there's no two ways around it. It's not a great situation, but there are things that we can do to support ourselves at home.
Absolutely. My mom used to take a blanket out because she didn't like bugs, but she would take a blanket out and just sit on the earth and in order to ground herself. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, Etan has written this fabulous book about fatherhood, and you bring up your children. What are some of the conversations that you might have had around how to process what's going on with the protests and with what happened in Central Park with Christian Cooper and a lot of these issues that are not new? I mean, we've had to grow up with them, and the generation before them have had to grow up with them, probably even worse than our generation. But how do you now prepare your children for that?
I mean, it's been tough, to be honest with you. Those are some tough conversations. And, we've had, our son Malcolm's 14. I mean, he hasn't really, been sleeping well at night. It's hard because you're balancing where, you want them still to be able to be children and not think about this and watch the little silly shows like Victorious and all the other stuff that we watch with. Yeah, we want them to be able to just focus on that. But then you have all this stuff in the world going. And you're like, well, I have to prepare them. And that part as a parent is tough, because this is not the way that it should be. They shouldn't have to be worried about this.
Yeah.
And the reality is we have to prepare them. We have to have those conversations with them. And those are the conversations that all Black parents have to have. We have to have the talk with our children.
Yeah.
And it's nerve-wracking. What Malcolm just said, he's 14 and he has a birthday coming up soon. And he's like, hey, I'm gonna be driving here in a year or so. First he was like, nah, get out of here, you're gonna be driving. I'm like, wait a minute. Carry the one.
You're right.
Driving here a little bit. But
Yeah.
we got scared. Because we were like, oh my gosh, so we got to teach him now, even reiterate what you have to do when you get stopped by the police. And what that was where our mind immediately went to. And that's one thing that's difficult for a lot of, non-Black people to be able to understand, because they don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
That's just the reality. Their kids turn 15, they're not worried, you know what I mean? It's just a whole different reality. But with that, we have to be able to find balance and not, stay in a constant state of fear and be able to live, but we still have to prepare. And that's a hard balance to do. It's hard.
It really is. And I think one of the things that we implore on a regular basis to keep us balanced is our faith.
Yes.
And it's a requirement. I mean, I don't know how people survive without faith. It's something that we have to kind of shift gears to. We do find ourselves in the preparation mode, but at the same time, we also tell them that prayers work. Every time daddy hits the road and is going to an event or is going to another speaking engagement where I know he'll be warmly met by the majority of people, but there are going to be a group of people that aren't too thrilled about his presence there.
Yeah.
Prayer works. So we just have to continue to encourage them to develop their own relationships with the Lord and to understand that we live in this world, but we're not of it. And we have a way that we can operate that's a little different than what other people do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. One of the things I talk about the 5 self-health actions that help to decrease chronic inflammation in your body and boost immunity. And the 5th one that I always talk about is managing your stress, and that prayer and meditation are research proven ways to do that, because it helps to bring down your stress hormones, boost your immune system, but just a positive, it gives hope and something to be able to, it's like an anchor.
Exactly.
In rough seas, which we are definitely going through now.
Definitely.
So, you talked about your children. I know I have a little bit of inside information that you all do homeschooling, and you were doing homeschooling before this pandemic hit. So are there any tips that you can share with parents that, have struggled with homeschooling and may actually need to struggle with it in the fall, just in case things are where we hope them to be?
Yeah, there's
There's a lot.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. Like, where do we start?
I think one thing I would say to parents is homeschooling is as much about your kids' development as it is about yours. And learning to give yourself grace in the way that you teach your child, in the things that they learn. We are so accustomed to a traditional education system that we think if they don't have 8 full hours of, learning, shuffling from class to class, this, that, and the other, then they're not doing it right. Okay. And that's actually not true. In a home environment, it's the amount of time you need is reduced dramatically because you have 1, 2, maybe 3 students in our case. So you don't need an entire day to work with your students. You don't need an entire day to work with your children. And the other thing is, they're your children. So yes, there's, curriculums that we need to be looking through and following through on, but at the same time, if you wake up in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a quarantine, and there's no normalcy in your life, why would you set an expectation for everything to go flawlessly? Give yourself some grace, give your child some grace, and love on each other through it. Some days we've gotten up and we've started work before the pandemic. We got up and we would start working and everybody would just be off. And we'd talk to the kids and say, okay, you know, what's up? What's going on?
Right.
And before we knew it, we'd be in the throes of tears and deep conversation, and everybody would just be at a place of just overwhelm. Those aren't the days to push. Those aren't the days your kids are going to retain anything.
Right.
So allow for there to be a little bit of space for you to see your child and for them to see you, because perfection is not what drives education. It's really about trial and error. That's the ways that we learn the best. And you know, being in an environment where you allow them to fail, but fail forward, and let them see you do the same thing every day, that's an environment for tremendous growth.
And also, it takes a little bit to learn your child's learning style.
And love language.
Yes. Because and that just takes a minute, but you just have to kind of just pay attention, and each child is different. I mean, we have 3. They're different. Completely different, you know. Some need a cheerleader. So some literally, you know, I'm just sitting there while they're doing their stuff, literally just cheering them on. That's all I'm doing. I'm not helping them with no work. I'm not helping them solve anything. Just literally
just patting them on the back.
And they're just moving right along with it.
And he's the cutest cheerleader ever. He's like, yes. And he's that thing. I get mad at them so much because they shout so loud.
It's that thing, though.
At the end, and they get the last problem correct. He goes, booyah! And everybody.
Oh, it's not booyah.
Booyah. That's it.
Can't be messing it up.
Right.
Hiya. It's so loud, and the whole house is like jumping. Well, good job.
Well, that makes learning fun, no matter what your learning style is. I mean, I know I learn very differently. You know, I'm a very visual learner, right? And that's one kind of learning style, and other people can just hear it, right? I can't hear it. It goes one end ear, comes out the other. I have to read it. So, and then some people have to move around when they're learning, you know? So, I mean, there's so many different things to keep in mind. And I think parents were just ill-equipped, as we all were going into this. We didn't know what to expect. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to stop and see if we have any questions right now.
We do have a question from the West Coast.
All right.
As a couple with so many demands, how do they manage date night and special alone time with each other?
Good question.
That's a good question.
So date night was a lot easier before the coronavirus because we can't go nowhere. And it's like,
we got 3 kids.
And then and so you know, since we've been quarantined, we all as a family have gotten closer together. See, I hear somebody creeping up here now. We're like we've gotten closer together. And I mean, and it's good, but then it's like, okay, we're gonna have a little date night. We're gonna watch a little movie or something like that. Y'all stay down there.
Right.
It's like the last part they don't hear.
You have to physically distance in the house.
Right. And we're like, why are you here? Like, what do you want? I just wanted to ask, can I get something to drink? Are you serious? You have to come all the way up here to ask us if you get something to drink? Go back downstairs. But I mean, you still have to be able to carve out time for each other. And what we've been able to do is, you know, try to go into each other's space. Like sometimes we'll sit, you know, outside, and even if it's just a little while, we have a little bit of time just to talk with each other. Or before, you know, my wife has a prayer room, and we try to just maybe just go in the prayer room for a little bit. You know, go outside. I'm a outside person. I like the little pool. We got a little pool. I like to sit there, and so that's my happy place. So you know, Nichole will come in there with me and just sit down for a little while.
Okay.
You know, sometimes it's, you know, that's like a decompress for me. Like I need sometimes you know, if you're looking at everything and you know you're talking about everything, especially everything going on right now, you go from, the police here, the NYPD, then Trump say something, and then this one you're like, oh, you're like this. You're literally looking at your screen, like, you know what I mean? And you need to kind of just relax for a little bit, and that's the part where Nichole comes and we just kind of relax and just chill for a second.
The other thing I want to say, just to that point, alone time I think is also one of the things that helps couples maintain during this time.
Yes.
Intimacy. I mean, the physical benefits of physical intimacy are amazing. The endorphins that are released, the chemicals that are released that suppress the cortisol and all the other stress hormones that are going through surging through our bodies right now. All of those things are amazing ways to
married couples, though. That's you're watching it.
We want to make sure we get this part straight, right? The pastor might be watching, right?
No, but seriously, married couples.
You're right.
It really is helpful. But even if you don't have the ability to do that regularly, I mean, it's important to be able to check in with one another and say, how are you? Like, to be truthful, sometimes you don't feel like being intimate. When you're looking at all the stuff that's going on in the world and you're stressed out and you're worried and you're thinking about our 14, soon to be 15-year-old son, you're not thinking about any of that stuff. And it's okay to check in with one another and say, you know what, listen, I hear you. I understand that. Just let me just give you a hug. Those kinds of things do help improve our ability to cope and to manage our stress. So, and they also help us to continue to remember that we are for each other.
Yes.
And that's what's really, I don't think it could be overstated how important it is in this situation that we're going through right now. Having people that are for you matters.
It's so important.
No question.
Right.
Yeah. And also it's important to laugh sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, and laugh where, because we're with the kids, so we watch kids shows. A lot of times we were on TV, and there's only so much in Nickelodeon and stuff. So we're watching their shows, but then it's sometimes to let them go away, and we watch shows that make us laugh, and we're laughing together, and it's those type of moments that bring you closer and have a reconnection, even in the midst of the chaos of the coronavirus and the protests and Trump, who November. I want to go on a different topic, but November.
Yeah.
But all those are stress. All of that stuff just brings so much stress.
Yeah, it's funny what you said about TV. I'm an Insecure fan. That makes me laugh. I said to Wayne, one of the best things that have happened this week is that Lawrence and Issa got back together. That was the high point of the week for me.
That's funny.
Yeah, and then human touch. I mean, intimacy is such a broad spectrum, right? Just touch, just hugs, like you said, is so important. So, thank you for that. Any other questions right now?
We have a question for Dr. Clarke. Can you talk about herd immunity?
Yes. Herd immunity is when a infectious disease goes through the population and at least 70% of the people gain immunity, meaning they have successfully fought it off and have antibodies. We talked about antibodies earlier to the virus so that they cannot get reinfected. Now, with herd immunity, though, you have to keep in mind, if you're talking about it in the context of coronavirus, we know that at least 20% of people will end up in the hospital and 1% of people will die. In a population of 350 million people, that means that around 260,000 of them or so, will get coronavirus, and 1% of those will die. That's not acceptable in terms of numbers of deaths. So when you talk about herd immunity and Sweden is doing it, that's not acceptable in this country, especially when you're talking about the fact that Black and brown people are being disproportionately affected. The 1% that's dying is going to have a lot of Black and brown people disproportionately so, and that really should be not even a conversation that we're considering. The other way that you get herd immunity is through a vaccine. So vaccines basically help people develop antibodies without having to have the disease. And that's why everybody's saying we're holding out for a vaccine, because that's another way to achieve that magical 60 or 70% of the population having antibodies so that the virus can't easily spread through the population like it's doing right now.
This question is for Etan. As an activist, especially during this time, how do you manage your mental wellness?
Yeah, so sometimes you just have to take breaks. That's what you have to do. Sometimes you have to disconnect. And right now, at this time, you know, it's like once you open up social media, you're going into this rabbit hole of so many different things, and you could just be sitting there. You could have just been planning on just barely looking at something, but there's so much going on nonstop, and you have to be able to disconnect. You have to be able. And sometimes I take, I just put my phone over there somewhere, and then I go over there and talk with baby Sierra. You know what I mean? Mess around with Marley. Marley's our dog, and for some reason he think he's my dog, and I don't know why. I honestly do not know why he thinks that. But
did you name him Marley, the Bob Marley thing?
No, that was the kids mostly.
The kids
okay.
Yeah, they were listening to Bob Marley since they were all little. So
I love it.
Yeah, Sierra first wanted to name him Buju.
That's a good name too.
But they settled on Marley. But yeah, you have to be able to disconnect. You have to be able to, take a break sometime, because it gets overwhelming. Like it literally, like you'll be reading things and speaking on things, and I'm going on different shows and doing panel discussions and things of that nature. And it's frustrating. I mean, your heart racing. Like sometimes I'll be, I'll after I finish talking, I'll be like, man, I'm sweating and carrying on. I gotta change my shirt, because I didn't work myself all up. But you have to just be able to disconnect sometimes. And that's when you disconnect and you go and be with your family.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You go and interact. You go and play with the kids. You go and talk to your wife. You go and you have to do that, or it'll just be too much.
Another thing that we do, and he does unknowingly, is melatonin for sleep.
Yes.
To help you get into a more restful sleep at night, which actually does help you to manage your mental health a little bit better. If you're well rested, you have a much easier time managing your stressors every day. But also just diet. Again, he's not eating a ton of sugar. He's not eating things that will kind of aggravate or antagonize his body physically with inflammation that's already under siege because of stress. So I try to really be cognizant of what he's dealing with in these types of situations, because it's just overwhelming. And he's on call constantly. He's getting emails and requests and, asking him to come on networks and this and that and all this stuff. And you don't want to say no, because it's such an important issue, but you can only show up to so much. And I think he's really, really good at saying, okay, I can't do anymore. Like, I'm gonna do my best, I'm gonna give what I got, but I can't do anymore.
I'm so happy you all said yes tonight. He's been on CNN and MSNBC today, y'all. So just so you know.
It's been a lot.
Yeah.
That's, just need the melatonin. Need the melatonin today.
Yeah. Have you had any of the shut up and dribble people on any of the panels that you've been on recently?
Oh, you talking about like Laura Ingraham and them?
Yeah.
No, they don't invite me to their panels. Fox News don't want to hear me right now.
Okay.
So no, not them. But it is interesting when you're looking at the people, and you can tell the people who aren't doing a good job of managing emotions, and you see them while they're on the news. You see them changing, and you see when they have to step away, and you see when they, so I can visibly see it. Yeah. So I've been on shows where I can say, "Oh Lord, they look tired. They ain't rested. They've been wound up." This is just like 3 minutes, 3 seconds of looking at them while because everything is virtual now.
Yeah.
But yeah, then that reminds me, it's like, okay, yeah, I need to disconnect and be able to relax a little bit before I be looking like them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there have been some anchors that have broken down in tears
No question
around this. I mean, I think everyone's emotional health and sleep patterns are off. And thank you for mentioning melatonin. I gave somebody that advice just last night.
Okay.
And I think for older people, our brains, as we get older, our brains produce less melatonin. So it's even more important in older people that if they're having sleep problems, that they consider it. And I always say, with the advice of your doctor before you take supplements, but it's important to, an important one to consider for sure.
I agree.
Any
we
other
have
questions?
a question from Alexis Proctor-Kellum. Many African Americans are skeptical about vaccines. As a medical professional, what are your personal and professional thoughts about an impending COVID-19 vaccine? And will you get the vaccine?
Good question.
Ooh, big question.
Good question.
Alexis Proctor-Kellum.
Yeah.
So, well, luckily my personal and professional opinions of vaccines coincide. I realize that vaccines historically have done a lot of positives, from the polio vaccine to the mumps, measles, rubella vaccine. I've personally witnessed cases of pertussis because, individuals, people who are concerned about vaccines in children always say that the pertussis vaccine is the one that they're concerned about in terms of causing autism, although that has been debunked in the medical literature. And so people tend to withhold that pertussis vaccine. I've seen outbreaks of pertussis in children, which can be fatal when you don't vaccinate. So I've seen that vaccines do good. When it comes to COVID-19, I expect that a vaccine will arrive on the scene. I expect that the right vaccine will help humanity overall. Getting to the right vaccine, I'm not sure that it can be hurried. And there are two areas in which I'm particularly going to be looking at the data myself. One is the safety data and the efficacy data, but making sure that that safety and efficacy data has been tried in multiple populations. Historically, in this country, we've had a problem making sure that clinical trials have included people of diverse backgrounds. And there are many reasons for that, but there really is no excuse for that now, because we have ways, we have institutions, HBCUs like Meharry and Howard and Morehouse that have track records of recruiting individuals of diverse backgrounds to participate in clinical trials. So there's absolutely no excuse that if a vaccine comes out, that it has not included a broad cross-section of those people who will be taking it. So I'll specifically be looking at that information before I decide to take it for myself. But I don't think that there is a grand conspiracy to inject microchips into people to make them sick with vaccines. I'm not concerned about it from that standpoint.
We have another question for the Thomases. They say they practice a hard quarantine. How have they kept their kids from going stir crazy?
Ooh, excellent question.
So
we did it for them.
Yeah, right. I'm pretty busy. So, our kids, our daughters play volleyball, and son plays basketball and soccer. So we got a real strong workout routine. And from that, between that and homeschooling and their work that they're doing, the day and chores, between those three things, the days move pretty quickly, to be honest with you, and they're busy. And so I think a lot of times when you have, kids who are quarantined at home and they're just sitting there and they have nothing to do, then that's when they start going stir crazy. But if they live behind, it's busy with some stuff. That's all right. They're busy. Go clean up something. Get us some chores to do.
Honestly,
there's always something to be cleaned up.
We went old school on them. The second week of the quarantine, I said, you know what? When I grew up, Saturday mornings were reserved for house cleaning.
Amen.
Early enough, then you could catch Saturday morning cartoons. But if you didn't, you just knew that you were going to wake up to get your chores done. So we actually started that about like second week of quarantine. Every Saturday morning they get up, they have their list of chores that they're responsible for, their laundry, their sheets, their this, their that. And then after that, they have some time to play video games, hang out, do the things that they like to do. And then Sunday mornings, we do church. You know, we watch church. We have breakfast together. We watch church. And then we usually just kind of have a day where we just hang out as a family, do goofy stuff, play around, play games, go, you know, in the pool or whatever. But during the week, like, you know, my husband said, there's not a lot of time for them. They don't have time to be bored. They have, you know, Zoom calls with their trainers and their coaches for volleyball that they have to be on, and they have to check in on time. And, you know, they're working out for an hour. They finish up. Then it's time for shower and then dinner. We have dinner. And then, so they're moving. They're moving throughout the day. And
maybe, would you mind sharing? I know you said Malcolm is 14, but everyone else's age of your kids, not yours.
Why you know our age? Why you know our business?
No, just the kids.
Program.
Old, I'm not.
No, but mine is 12 and baby Sarah's 9.
Okay, great.
And they get on each other's nerves just like every other set of kids.
No
siblings.
They get on each other's nerves, but then they always want to be all on top of each other. I'm like, why don't you go over there and then you go that way? Why I gotta be right in the same space, getting on each other's nerves?
Right. Well, that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. Just let them figure it out.
Yeah.
So we're winding down the questions, and we have a question from Gina B. Prince. Is contact tracing an app that is going to track you where you go and who we're around? I think that is why people question the process.
So that's a great question, Gina. Different countries have done it different ways. I know in China, they had a drone that detected temperatures in the crowd. In South Korea, they had the app that you're talking about. And I do believe that there's been talk of Google developing an app here. I think it's going to be up to the individual states and local health departments as to how they're going to do it. I know in the District of Columbia, for example, they're ramping up the number of contact tracers. They're trying to hire about 900 contact tracers. And they're planning, as far as I know, to do it the old-fashioned way, probably with the help of technology, but maybe not. You know, with 900 people, you can do a lot of phone calls. And that's really, I think, the primary way to reach out to people, because there are the other support services that I mentioned too, which are helping to educate people around COVID-19, also helping with food delivery and locating people if they cannot safely physically distance in the living situation that they're in, and helping them find other places to be. I know with individuals who are homeless, they found hotels for up to 400 individuals who are homeless to be, so that they have places to wash their hands and to help practice social distancing, and basically just to be safe, which is really probably something we should have been doing all along. But again, we've seen a lot of changes in society, some positive, with the coronavirus. And so I think with contact tracing, it's going to be up to the individual municipalities as to how they handle it.
And we have a final question. You've given the ages of your children. How are they responding to the current events? Are they responding differently? And how do you manage their responses, their individual responses?
That's a great question. And yeah, they're definitely different. You know, Imani gets angry. So Imani is
his twin.
Yeah, that's a little bit. She has a little bit of me in her, but she gets angry, and you know, Malcolm gets worried. So right, and you know, he wasn't able to sleep regularly at night, and he was waking up, and he was talking to me about different. So we had to do a little bit more talking about everything. And I you know, Fridays are with homeschooling is our days that we have them write papers. So this past Friday, they wrote papers on everything that was going on. And, you know, we gave them some points to really focus on, and their points were different, and they had a lot of questions, and their questions are different. and their concerns are different. Like Imani said, if the lady didn't record George Floyd being killed, and everybody didn't react the way that they reacted, would the police officer have been arrested? That's what she asked me. And, I'm looking at her and I'm like, and by my hesitation, she already knew the answer, and I want to be able to tell her, yes, they would have done the right thing and they would have been arrested. But I was like, I don't know. But that's just the way that her mind works. And then, I saw her face scrunch up and she was like, that's not right. Like, how are we supposed to have, any kind of, faith in the system if the system doesn't do what's right? She's like, how are we supposed to have faith in the system to even work? And I was like, these are all great questions, but it's and then we have baby Sierra, who's 9, and we literally, she had one of Nichole's best friends that she played ball with at Syracuse. They're best friends, so our daughters are really close friends. So we came in and they were FaceTiming each other. And literally both of them was just crying and sad. And they were like, this shouldn't happen. Like, why is this like this? Like, why, when she's 9. So that everybody is reacting differently. But it's hard as a parent because you have to navigate, first of all, 3 different levels, 3 different personalities, 3 different ages, 3 different, places of understanding of everything. And it's hard. It's tough. It's very tough.
And one thing that Sierra said to me, it was late one evening and we were tucking her in for bed, and she said, "Mommy, did you see that?" And I was like, "No, what?" And she said it was a police car, and it was just driving through our neighborhood. We, sometimes have the neighborhood watch officer driving through or whatever. And I said, yeah. I said, well, baby, why did you get so upset? And she just looked at me like, what do you mean? Why did I get upset? It was a police car.
Right.
Like,
and like, haven't you been paying attention, mommy?
And it was, I mean, the notion was so clear. Like, I don't have any faith that police officers are here to protect us. And nothing that y'all have ever nothing we've seen lately gives us any indication that that's the case. And I explained to her, as heartbreaking as it is, there are a lot of bad people in the world, but at the same time, there are a lot of good people in the world, and we always try to bring it back to a place of hope and a place of, potential for good. So that, they can kind of rest easy. But like Etan said, it's very difficult, very, very, very difficult.
I think we do have one last question, although that was supposed to be the last question, but I see it flashing up on the screen.
The last question in the lightning round, because Etan has to leave. How would Etan suggest that the protests translate to public policy to improve our existence, thus our mental health?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, first of all, that in order for, when people talk about what the issues, and it's interesting listening, on CNN, and they're talking about, okay, how do we fix, and they make this big grandiose thing, like, how do we fix racism in the world? Like, well, hold up now. We ain't trying to fix all that. Now we just need to have police officers be held accountable when they kill somebody. That's what we need. You know what I mean? We need accountability. We need to have the same rules for police officers that they have for everybody else. Whereas if you kill someone, you are punished and you go to prison. That's what we need. And right now, we have a system that is all out of place. It's completely out of whack. So we have a system where, a police officer kills somebody, and then they have an internal investigation. So I'm going to investigate myself. And I'm going to tell you what I found, after I investigated myself. That doesn't even make logical sense. And there needs to be an outside entity that then investigates every police killing. That's what needs to happen. An entity that has nothing to do with the police department.
Right.
They investigate it, and then their findings of what happened then proceeds to go to see what happens next. And then they have to have where a police officer can't just say, I was in fear for my life. And that's it. Not show no evidence. You didn't see a gun. You didn't see, there was no, they have to actually show proof of a reason for them to brandish their weapon. So a lot of the people that I'm working with now, I'm looking with the families of the victims of police brutality, like Emerald Garner, who is Eric Garner's daughter, and Tiffany Crutcher, who is Terrence Crutcher's sister. Both of their loved ones were killed by the police. And they're trying to implement new laws in the various places. And the reason why people have to understand is that there's no federal law for the way the police departments, operate. Each one is completely different. So the one in PG County Police Department is completely different than the Tulsa Police Department. And the NYPD has their own thing. Then you have Miami, then you have LA, everybody completely different. So the fight is different in every single one. I think it would be great if they were all one rule for everyone, federally ran. I think personally that would be great, but but that's not how they're designed to operate. So now what Tiffany Crutcher always says is she says that you cannot change someone's heart.
Legislate.
And you can't legislate their heart. But what you have to do is change the laws so that they cannot act on their bias or their hatred or their racism. You know what I mean? So that's what we have to be pushing for. So right now we have their attention that there is an issue, that there is a problem, that there is something wrong. We have allies. We have white allies all over the country who are coming to protest and, peacefully. You have others that are agitators, and that's a whole different topic that we see them throwing stuff through windows, and then all the black people get blamed. We see that too. But we have everybody's attention right now. So now is where we have to start putting pressure on who makes the laws in the specific local areas. And a lot of that comes with local elections.
Yes.
Now, we don't have to talk about why national elections are important. You know what I mean? Look, we see, we don't even have to.
We know that.
We don't have to know. But locally, that is who is in charge of, hiring the police chief, who is head of the police department. That's the head who reported the school superintendent. Those local elections are where everything happens locally. So if you don't like the way things are happening, that's where you need to have your anger at. You know what I mean? When you go to the voting booth, when it's time for you to vote out the mayor, all the mayoral offices, or all the different people who are in charge of everything locally, that's where people really need. And you can't wait until something bad happens to say, oh, this person here, you have to look at their track record. Mm-hmm. And if they're not representing your needs, then you got to vote them out. Like, we shouldn't be having all of these different elections, and campaigning that happens around Maryland and PG County all the time. And then we have the turnout and it be in the teens, meaning 13%.
Yeah. Tomorrow's election day in Maryland.
Yes. It should not be 13% turnout. Now, yes, we don't have some of the issues that other places have. But when you have something, we have a lot that we need to still be going to the elections about. Absolutely. So I think that is where everything needs to push towards. Now, we have to go towards pushing to be able to change everything locally, where we have control of where we specifically live. And by we, it's wherever anybody else is specifically living. And then that's how you enforce change locally.
Absolutely. And the same is true of health departments and these decisions that are being made around local communities and COVID-19, and whether you're sending in the police to police people rather than giving them masks and hand sanitizers and hyper-local messaging.
Right.
It all interrelates. It all comes back to local politics.
Definitely.
Yeah. Mr. Wayne Bruce, are we?
It is a wrap.
It is a wrap. All right. Well,
back to you, Dr. Clarke.
Thank you all so much. You were wonderful. And I do have some closing words before we sign off that I want to share with everyone. But I, of course, definitely want to thank you all for participating. I mean, we've covered a whole lot, and I could have only covered that breadth of subjects with two people who have expertise in the areas that you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I wanted to just pick up on one of the threads that we touched on, and that's around stress and what's been happening with the violence and racism, which are core causes of the very stress that promote ill health in Black people and other communities of color. So, I talk about the 5 self-health actions. I talked about them tonight: nutrition, water, movement, and sleep. But the 5th one, I always save for last because I think it's so important to emphasize that it's the most important: how to manage the stressors in our lives. But for Black people, that's on a whole nother level because we have all the regular stressors: finances, work, aging parents, rebellious kids. But no matter how successful we are at managing those, there are these other ones: racism, police brutality, outright murder, that keeps getting thrown up in our face as real daily threats to our existence. So it's no wonder that we have the health conditions that we do because of the additional stress we have in our lives and the illusion that we can't do anything about it. It's really tempting to be overwhelmed, frustrated, angry. I certainly have had all those emotions this week, but it reminded me, as I looked at all the things that we were going through, of a study that I actually read when I was at the National Human Genome Center as a population health consultant there. And I got exposed to a whole lot of stuff there, but this one study was so important, and I have to share it with you. They looked at African-American men who self-reported being exposed to racism, and they looked at their DNA. And they look for signs of wear and tear on their DNA, which are associated with stress, premature aging, chronic diseases. They looked at that same pattern of wear and tear. And they saw in African-American men who internalized the exposure to racism and basically had it affect their self-image and made themselves think of themselves as less than. In those Black men, they found more wear and tear on their DNA. But in men who did not let it affect their self-image, they found absolutely no DNA damage that you find with premature aging. It's a really amazing study because it tells us that no matter the stressors that we're going through, even if they're as ugly and disgusting as racism, as long as we do not let it affect our internal image of who we are, that we will remain resilient and we will be the conquerors at the end of the day. I want to leave you all with that as we continue to go into probably more weeks of protest, certainly more weeks of COVID-19 and the stress that we're going through that. I hope that you keep that in mind. And we'll be back next Monday. I'm looking forward to seeing you then on Excuse Me, Doctor. And until then, be wise, be well, and be health empowered.